community is composed of the collective stories, history, and heritage of its people. It's important that everyone has the opportunity to share their story and be heard. The Community Oral History Project creates community space for people to come together to share and learn about the history, heritage, and traditions of our communities, highlighting what we share in common. Community can be defined by location, or community can be considered a collection of people bound together by shared experiences. My name is Emily Jones Hudson, and here are these stories.
So Joshua Randall Holland, born May 25th, 1983. I feel like I have to remember that, but 1983, born in Louisiana at Fort Polk, which is in Leesville, Louisiana, military base down there. So yeah, born there, yeah, and was born there. And then after my dad's military service, my dad's from Lexington area, my mom's from Cincinnati. They met at Morehead State University, and then of course my dad was in the Army, and then I came along, and then after my dad's military service was finished, my parents went back to Morehead for more school to get their master's degrees. My mom got her degree, master's in teaching. My dad got his in business. And so my parents, when they finished their degrees, looking for jobs, my mom had a friend that she went to Morehead with who was from Knott County. And my mom ended up getting a job at Perry County as a special ed teacher at Dennis Wooten Elementary School. And my dad got a job at Walmart working in kind of their management pipeline to be a manager. And so, my dad ended up at Hazard Walmart, and my mom ended up at Dennis Wooten. And I ended up in first grade at Dennis Wooten. And then the following year, my mom, her friend that she went to college with actually taught at Car Creek Elementary School. And so Car Creek had a special education position open. So my mom, dad, we moved to Sassafras, and my mom started teaching at Car Creek. And then my parents ended up getting a divorce. And so, kind of through all that, we ended up just moving, and we were looking for a place to live. And so my mom found a place in Red Fox, up in Horseshoe Bend. So we ended up moving to Horseshoe Bend when I was in fourth grade. We ended up moving to Red Fox, and so from fourth, fifth grade on, I was in Red Fox until I graduated high school. Obviously went to Car Creek, went to Knott County Central High School, but yeah, that's when I moved to the great community of Red Fox, the great town, the metropolis of Red Fox. So
Okay.
it
So what was it like growing up in Red Fox?
Well, I will tell you, Red Fox, it changed my life. Just to be honest, I'm so grateful and thankful to God that He put me in Red Fox. I mean, it has shaped who I am. So a little bit of the, and I'm just gonna say it like it is. People, there may be some disagreements or people may not, but I'm just gonna say it how I experienced it, and that's all I know. Back up a little bit, my mom and dad, of course, I was born into a military family, and, my parents, when it came to issues of race, my parents, my dad's best friends in the Army were African American or black. There's pictures of me in the cradle, like in my crib in Fort Polk, Louisiana, with two little brothers, right? Two little African American boys, and that was my parents' best friends in the Army. was a black family. So from the time that, from before I could even comprehend color, race, whatever, there was just never a difference. In my family, there was never a difference for me. People always just being people, And so, like moving to Red Fox, obviously in Knott County, coming here, Dennis Woot, we don't have a very huge African American population, but going to school, going to Car Creek, my two best friends, Joshua Williams, Kenya Williams, the Hagans, the Williams, just everybody from Red Fox, right? So Red Fox, to me, like moving there and living there, it's like that's where all the black people live, in Red Fox. So, but to me, I loved it. I loved it. I felt more at home in Red Fox than I felt anywhere in my life to that point. So as a 4th or 5th grade boy whose parents just went through a divorce, who, family's not originally from here. My family's not originally from Eastern Kentucky. I don't have generations and generations that grew up here. I'm a transplant. So I kind of always, didn't really feel, I guess, at home looking back on it, but Red Fox just felt like home. And it felt like home. I felt more at home in Kenya Williams' house than I felt in my own house or anybody else's house. I felt more at home in an African American house than I did anywhere else. And I can't really explain that. Don't really know why that is. It's just the way, I don't know. It's just the way God wired me. But, I love growing up in Red Fox. Things that really stand out to me about growing up there, like the positives is, one, being in Kenya Williams' house, being in Evelyn Williams' house. So Evelyn Williams was Kenya's grandmother. And, they got ties to New York and they got ties to, so like I remember, just the accents were different. My accent was different, we were all kind of like transplants, I guess. I guess that maybe had a part of making it feel like home. But I can remember being in Miss Evelyn's living room, and I'm 5th grade, 6th grade, and like Miss Evelyn's living room was a living Black History museum. And so I consider myself very, very blessed to be a young, white boy in Eastern Kentucky, but to have the multi-ethnic experience, to have that experience to be in a home where I'm welcomed, I'm feeling like family, but our skin color is different, but it don't matter. It didn't matter to Miss Evelyn. It didn't matter to Dean or Kenny or all of Kenya's family or all of Josh's family. Like I was just a part, it was just family. It was just love. Pure love. There was no, you're white, you're black, you're different. It was just love. But I remember sitting in that living room, years of sitting in that living room and looking around the walls and seeing, Frederick Douglass, seeing Harriet Tubman, seeing depictions of the slave trade and slave ships and seeing family history of how, African Americans, how, people got to this country and hearing Miss Evelyn's stories about Vico and hearing stories about some of the things she experienced, like the KKK, or I remember her telling us a story one time about, they were all little growing up and a mob had gotten a man. A mob had gotten a man and he was bringing him through and they lynched him. And so like she was there for that. She remembers like hiding and running and so telling us those stories and then like sitting in her living room and how many, I'm just gonna say it like it is, how many white kids in Eastern Kentucky have had that experience to live that closely and to be, that tight with the Black community in our mountains, I know people are friends and hang out, but it was more than that. I mean, I was sitting in the living room, you know, I mean, some of the first movies I really remember watching was, you know, The Color Purple, Roots, Malcolm X. Like, I mean, you know, and I'm there with them. And, you know, I remember Miss Evelyn used to always joke, you know, you can kind of see, you know, there's Josh Williams, there's Kenya Williams, and there's, you know, me in the middle. And when we were little, Miss Evelyn, you know, Kenya's grandmother would always say, there's my Oreo cookie, my little Oreo cookie, you know, and obviously I'm the, you know, the white in the middle. And, you know, she just always thought that was funny. And, you know, I remember, you know, Kenya's dad always calling me his albino son, and just, you know, being a part of the family and feeling so at home and so welcome. You know, but it was also, you know, there's also some, I guess, negatives with that too. I mean, you know, there were people in school, you know, who would get on to me and say, you know, why are you trying to act black? You know, why are you trying to act black? You know, you're not black, you know, and you're trying to act like a black guy. You're trying to be black or whatever. And it's like, man, this is just, you know, this is who I am. Like, this is where I live. This is where I'm from. This is the, you know, this is the environment that shapes me. And I remember, you know, at school, you know, nothing was really, I guess, too crazy or too violent. I mean, especially compared to what people dealt with, you know, in the decades before us. I mean, we're talking the 90s. You know, we're not talking like, you know, the civil rights movement or, you know, I mean, you know, obviously the atrocities and the things that have happened to people of color in our nation are well documented. But I do remember there being times where, you know, you show up at school and, you know, somebody would scratch KKK on your locker. I mean, this is 1999. Or I remember, you know, somebody wrote the word, you know, wigger. You know, I was called a wigger a few times, you know, or there was a guy I remember showed up and he had a t-shirt on. I mean, this is 2000, you know, and some guy in our high school wore a t-shirt that was Boys in the Hood, and it was the KKK. It was a KKK shirt, Boys in the Hood, and it had some KKK members with their hoods on, and in the background it had depictions of people being lynched and crosses burning. And it's like, you know, and you know, I remember guys would try to bring rebel flags and, you know, just try, you know, every now and then you'd have some of that, you know, or every time you'd play football somewhere, no doubt, Josh and Kenya, or you know, I grew up with the Lindens too, you know, they played football with us, Marcus Linden. You know, every time we go play somebody anywhere in Eastern Kentucky, they're getting called the N-word. I mean, this is 2000, you know. So I do, you know, I remember stuff like that. But you know, you know, growing up in Red Fox, I mean, I definitely see God's hand, because, you know, we went from a boy that grew up in Red Fox, you know, immersed in the Red Fox community. You know, we always joke Red Fox Mafia and all that stuff. And, you know, grew up in that culture, listening to music, you know, hip hop music, rap music. And, you know, a lot of me, my color don't match, you know, whatever. But it just, what's interesting about that is years later, the Lord would call me into ministry, and the Lord would call my family to New Orleans. You know, it's funny how we got the Red Fox sign sitting below the depiction of the French Quarter, Cafe du Monde in New Orleans. And the Lord would call us to the city of New Orleans, which, if you know anything about New Orleans, I mean, it is you know, predominantly, you know, the culture of New Orleans is, you know, that Creole, that Cajun, that, you know, African American culture, hip hop. And so the Lord ends up calling us to plant a church in Holly Grove, 17th Ward, New Orleans, Louisiana, where Lil Wayne grew up. And, you know, to me, living there, like, people would always ask, like, how can you live there? Like, you're a white family. How can you live in Holly Grove? I'm like, well, because I'm from Red Fox. You know, like, I mean, this ain't, you know, this ain't new to me. This ain't, you know, this ain't foreign to me. Like, I'm not, you know, the music, the culture, the way people talk, you know, like, this ain't a real big stretch for me, because I grew up in Miss Evelyn Williams' house. You know, I grew up in a house in Red Fox. I grew up, you know, I mean, not in the urban culture, because it is different. There is a difference between urban African American culture and mountain African American culture, just because, you know, city life is different than country life. But it wasn't, you know, I definitely see God, you know, the connection there. But yeah, that's a little bit about Red Fox. And, you know, I thank God for Red Fox and just teaching me those lessons about, and I know people don't like to say this anymore, because I know there's a flaw with this statement about not seeing color. There's a flaw with that, because we should see color, and we should celebrate color, and we should, you know, be proud and thankful that God Almighty, that God who created us all in His image, made a very colorful, He made color. So we shouldn't be blind to color or colorblind, you know, because I know there's a flaw in that, but there's also a truth in that. You know, you gotta, you know, I'm thankful for Red Fox. I'm thankful for my family, you know, who grew up, you know, teaching me to not be racist. I mean, just be real, you know, just to not be racist. And thankful for those lessons learned as a young boy sitting in Miss Evelyn's living room. So.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit about your life growing up in Red Fox, and just sharing your story, and because I think it's very important and gives us a lot of insight, and you know, what it was like coming up then.
Yes, ma'am.